Welcome. In this episode, I have the privilege of interviewing Nelson Tepfer. Now, Nelson is the co-founder and CEO of Pro CFO Partners based out of New York. His story is awesome, to put it bluntly. I was looking forward to this conversation with him for a while. Nelson is one of those distinguished individuals who has every right to come to the table with a stack of bona fides and really lay down the weight of his accomplishments. Yet he's accessible, he's grounded, he's humble, and he's eminent source of insight and wisdom. My respect for Nelson is at the top of the charts. His journey in founding the company was very inspiring to hear, very charging as an entrepreneur to get that insight, but also the clarity and concise way that he delivered that origin story was world-class. Like I said, I've got nothing but respect and appreciation for Nelson. He's an awesome leader and an inspiration. So without further ado, I give you Nelson Tepfer. And we're live. Nelson, it's good to see you.
Great to be here.
Thanks for carving out some time to sync up today. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
That's great. Let's do it.
You know, since the first time you and I started connecting, I felt that there was at the very least, a shared sense of humor. I found there to be a nice reciprocity between the two of us. And, there's those people in life that are wicked smart, who are executors in the highest regard, who are true operators, who have a track record of success, but somehow find a way to remain grounded in humility and accessible. Not only are you all of those things, Nelson, you also
I was going to say, if you meet any of them, please introduce me. I'd like to meet them too, but no.
I mean, in all seriousness, you found a way to do all of those things, to be all of those things, but you also have a lighthearted sense of humor that's rare and respected. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much.
You got it, man. And the theme of the conversation today is centered around this concept of an origin story. Oftentimes when someone is looking to start a business or make the jump out of corporate America, or even in a smaller context, start a new initiative within a pre-existing business, there's this diving board sensation, right? Should I jump? Should I not? And when you spot someone further down the trail, in your case, much further down, you've summited multiple times, that can be perceived as requiring superpowers, a feat only made possible by a Herculean effort over many years and decades. And I wonder if we can start where it all began, and you can walk us through how you've gotten to where you are today. Where did it all begin?
Sure. So to dispel any illusion, if you haven't done this with any of the previous conversations, there is no Herculean effort. There's lots of effort, but there's no superpower. There is no magic to it. My own story begins in this space where probably going back to close to 15 years ago, led me down this path to where we are today. I was what I thought at the time happily employed as a full-time CFO. Or as I say, semi-jokingly to others, back when I used to work for a living, before I went out on my own kind of thing. So I was what I thought at the time happily employed as a full-time CFO. And a friend of mine had reached out to me and said, look, a friend of his is having some trouble with his company. Can I have a conversation and maybe give him some advice? I was like, how about a friend of a friend? Sure, we'll have a conversation. And that conversation ended up turning into a year-long interim CFO role that I actually juggled with my full-time role. So it was a very, very, very busy year. But what I found in working that way, and I use these words so carefully, but so deliberately, it was so much more fun working like that. I learned a new company, new business, new industry, and the things that were day-to-day in my previous role were really like magic to a company like this. And so I was like, this is a lot of fun. I want to do more of this. So I actually went back to my full-time role at the time, converted it into a part-time one, and then started working with companies like this on my own. Over the next 7 to 8 years, I did this on my own across nearly a dozen different industries, from companies ranging in size from startup to close to $500 million in revenue. And I loved it. I loved the work I was able to do, the impact I was able to have on these companies to really help them succeed and grow. But after doing this on my own for about 7 to 8 years, I realized I kept running into some variation of the same challenges again and again and again. Boiled down to the same three challenges is what I really had to identify it as. Number one, when you're a solopreneur and doing everything on your own, it is very difficult to develop and deliver at the same time. When you get pretty busy and you're working on all of your current clients, it is difficult to maintain a pipeline. If you're focusing on the pipeline, it is difficult to deliver for your clients, which really, that goes very much hand in hand with the number two, in that it is pretty much as feast or famine. Usually you find yourself either way too busy or not busy enough because you're juggling that, pipeline and delivery issue. But the third reason was probably actually the biggest impetus to lead me down this path. And that's when you're doing this on your own, you only have your own experience and expertise to offer. And as expensive as that may be, you don't have, it's still only the things that you've actually done. And I found, interestingly enough, that showed up two ways, when delivering and doing this kind of work. One, occasionally you'd run into the business owner who asks, well, have you worked in this industry before? Now, most of the issues we're helping our clients with have nothing to do with the industry that they're in, but it is an occasional objection. And I understand it. As a business owner, you want somebody who understands, if you're looking for this kind of help, you want somebody who understands your business, understands your industry. Even though the actual issues are not rooted in the industry, I definitely understand the desire to have somebody familiar with it. But the flip side to that is that you don't have teammates or colleagues to bounce ideas off of. You only have the things that you've done. And so one of my members of my team, when being interviewed recently, on one of our podcasts, so he went through some of his background, and the person who's doing the interview says, wow, it sounds like you've done just about everything. And he says, pretty straightforward, which is something I was very happy about to find out after. He goes, well, I haven't, but here at Pro CFO Partners, across our 50-person team, we definitely have seen and done just about everything. So at this stage, I'm now realizing that these are the three challenges that keep coming up. And I was like, okay, let me think about ways to do this bigger and better. At the time, interestingly enough, I wasn't really looking to go build a company. I was actually looking like, let me go join another company that's already doing this. I'll find my home, find a lot of people I want to do this with. And so I went looking, and by and large, I didn't really like what I found. As in, organizations like this were not really offering much value to the CFO who was joining, was not delivering much for the clients that they were going to be working with. I did join one organization that had some great people, did not work out. They were very successful internationally. They were trying to do work more like this here in the States. Didn't work out for various reasons, but it was there that I met my business partner. And the two of us, while we were there, we were both with that organization for about 2 years. And while we were there, last year or so, we kept having some variation of the same conversation over and over again. Is this really the best way to do this? And best was not about our own egos. The best was, is this best for our team? Is this best for our clients? And the answer kept coming up as no. So finally, we were faced with a choice. Either we can stop complaining about it, or we can actually go do something about it. And neither of us were going to stop complaining about it. So we launched this company actually in January of 2020. When we launched, it was me, my business partner, and 6 CFOs when we launched this company. And now there are around 50 of us. And that growth has been, as every company that grows quickly will probably resonate with this, it has been exciting, it has been exhausting, it has been exasperating, and it has been exhilarating all at the same time.
Nelson, thanks for sharing that. Very tight and cohesive overview. Question: how did things change from Q1 2020 when you launched to Q2 2020? It seems to be reminded of a global event that happened in and around that time.
So, the things changed pretty quickly for us, very, very rapidly. We talk about a lot of this internally was our rapid growth and scale because of COVID or despite COVID. And frankly, there's a lot of arguments to both sides. So the short answer I usually say is yes, definitely COVID. For us, while we definitely want to have a presence wherever our clients actually are, no one was, if you think about it way back when those early days, no one was working anywhere. Everyone was working from home. So it definitely made it a lot easier for us to be part of those teams. Whereas now, if our clients are back in their offices, we need to have some in-office presence, and therefore we have to work out what that actually looks like. But so definitely were some very rapid changes along the way. But also, frankly, it really allowed us to really dive in and help the companies we were working with at that time. We were telling many companies, and this is really what showed up for us as we saw it. High tide hides a lot of rocks, especially in this whole finance and accounting area, which many of these companies were lacking that level of leadership, that level of process or framework in place that really helps them drive and grow the company. And frankly, COVID certainly let the tide out for many of them. And they realized, well, they kind of have some things, but this is really not what they actually need to help them get through this next stage of the company, to help them navigate what was going on. And so we were really able to help many, 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 many companies navigate through this. Whether they were actually clients of ours or not, we just became a resource to many in our business community and our network to ask the questions of early days of PPP, or EIDL, a lot of those, not because we were charging anything we were not charging any fees to help companies do that. Of course, we helped every one of our clients that was going through that, but just to be that resource for everyone who had questions around any of those things. Mm-hmm. So COVID certainly was, navigating it was certainly interesting to say the least, but I think we came out of it pretty strong, and we were able to help many companies come out of it even stronger than the way they went into it.
Thanks for sharing that. Oftentimes, when you look at a business that's scaling, that has validated a need for their clients, for their customer base, and the challenge that you'll hear a lot of the entrepreneurs and founders discussing is on scaling team as being very close to as important as scaling the customer pipeline. We offline, you and I have talked a few times about your very intentional approach to cultivating team culture and sourcing new team members who have values alignment and are high performing and are the right fit for your team. Going from the place where you kicked off in Q1 of 2020 with 5 team members to the place you're at now with 10x that, what was your initial approach in those early days that shifted perhaps with the all remote work in Q2? And what are the big cycles of learning that you've gone through to get to the place where you're at today from the talent side?
So it's really interesting. With talent was always been a very big focus for us because from my experiences, recognizing what it takes to be successful here is not always, the resume or the credentials that people walk in the door with. For the type of work we do, it's not always, oh, well, they've been a CFO somewhere for 10, 15, 20 years. I'm sure they can be great working with us. We don't always find that translates. What I found fascinating is, early days, we were able to pick the talent innately based on, we understand what it takes and this person seems to resonate, then gets it and they move forward. As we grew, we had to be more deliberate with putting down on paper what that innate things that we were doing, what it actually looked like. This person is a good fit or isn't a good fit. Why? What are the pieces that make this person? What would be the pieces that make this person actually a good fit, and actually come up with documentation around this? So that when anyone goes through our recruiting process, which is usually 3 interviews, we actually put almost every candidate through. It's what is it that what are each one of those interviewees looking for, and how are they rating the candidate as to whether they should be moving forward or not after that? Because it is not all the technical skills. The technical skills are just what gets them the conversation with us. It is everything afterwards. Is this kind of work a good fit for them? Are they interested in doing this kind of work for the right reason? Are they at the right stage where this kind of work is something that will align with what they want to do for themselves as they move forward? There are many, many factors that go into that. But what we found is, while we do it innately, if we're looking to grow the company and have the rest of our organization be a part of that process and interviewing and recruiting process, we have to start documenting what are those qualities that we innately sensed that now we have to have others begin to look for, others begin to screen for as we grow the company.
Where we started the origin story was where you were happily working for a living, and you got an opportunity to work in a new company, a new industry as an interim CFO, which was a lot of fun and sounded like the catalyst for you pursuing the next sort of chapter of your journey. And I wonder, what happened to get you to that place where you were working full time as a CFO prior to all of that? And what's led your journey to these place?
So it's an interesting journey, and for probably actually not the typical CFO journey. When we're going way back, when I came out of undergrad, I actually went to school for finance. I was convinced I was going to take over Wall Street. So not the accounting side, which is the path that most CFOs go through. So I actually went through the finance world. And when I was coming out of undergrad, interestingly enough, I was like, I had some offers actually from some of the big banks on Wall Street. And I was like, okay, picking which one I wanted to go for. And then someone else had reached out to me and said, here's this opportunity in a business for this kind of role. And I was thinking to myself, look, Wall Street's not going anywhere. In theory, I can always go back to Wall Street, but this kind of opportunity sounds interesting. Let's try that for a year or two and see what it actually turns into. And you look back whatever number of years later, and it's like, well, I never made it to Wall Street because that opportunity led to more opportunities, led to others, led to me growing and scaling an organization, to one of the largest in its space within the area, and eventually taking on the CFO role there, and then moving on to other CFO roles, and eventually the one where I was sitting before I started this path of my career. So it is always fascinating to me where people begin to think about their careers, early days and where they end up in their careers. I've gotten asked a lot over the years, well, should I do this for my education? Should I do this for my career? My feedback is usually, very rarely is it a right or wrong. It's, what are the reasons you're doing it for? What do you hope to get out of it? And are those the one is that next step going to be the one that's going to provide you the options you're looking for further down the road?
It's interesting to think of approaching a career, approaching a business in that way, keeping yourself open for opportunity and open for options, being adaptable.
That mindset is really, really, really key. It really is. We see this with many of the companies we support right now. We very often look at our role. Yes, we're the CFO titles, but we look at our role. It's about building the framework for financial management and growth that allows companies to recognize those opportunities and capitalize on them. That allows them to recognize that where are they focusing? How are they actually earning their profits? What does that actually look like that's going to support them achieving their goals? And it's that mindset and adaptability that becomes so key for those companies to grow and really, really, get to that next level of whatever their objective actually is.
Nelson, how have you seen the role change over the years, over the decades, from where your first roles began and into what you're seeing now, and perhaps as a amalgamation across all of the experiences you can see across your whole team and across the whole fractional CFO or CFO space in general?
Sure. So it's interesting. I say semi-jokingly that in my very first CFO role, when I used to tell people what I did, this is as a full-time CFO, it was my responsibility to make sure as much money as possible comes in and as little as possible goes out. But frankly, that's really an antiquated way of looking at the role, because the CFO's role has really evolved into something so much more within organizations where they're not just that steward of watching, what's going on, but more the actual catalyst and driving the growth very often. That role now calls for so much more from the strategic level to ensure the pieces are actually built correctly that actually supports the company's goals. Identifying the opportunities, making sure the structure is in place so that the business leaders in that company have the insight they need to make the decisions they have to on an ongoing basis. And I say insight, not just another report, not just having, more reports and more lines of data to go through. There's a big difference between having just more information at your fingertips and having actual insight. So as CFOs now, the way we're supporting our clients, it's really more about how do we build this finance and accounting function? So not only is it systematic, sustainable, and scalable, but it's actually built to support the growth and goals of the company. It is really about building that framework for financial management and growth, being that strategic partner to the business owner while actually executing on all of these pieces that's really going to drive the growth and goals of what they're trying to achieve. So it certainly has been a shift. I remember speaking to an early CFO mentor of mine, and that shift And he started laughing. He says, yeah, we used to just call them good CFOs and bad CFOs, meaning the strategic ones were good ones and ones were just focusing on the watching everything going on. The tactical side were the bad ones. But he's probably right. When I was thinking about this afterward, but in large part, that's been one of the biggest shifts. And it's also, frankly, one of the biggest blind spots I think, for many business owners. Finance and accounting is usually that black box to them. It's one of the things they know needs to happen, but what it's supposed to do for them, they're usually busy building and growing the company. They're not thinking about that, as what it should be doing for them. And that's really where we very often step in is how is this piece not only supposed to be supporting you achieving your goals, but driving you towards achieving those goals.
Does that ever take the shape of like cross-functional work with other department heads in organizations?
It really should. Absolutely. So, if you think about what this function touches, it really touches almost every area of the business. It's not that we are in charge of every area of the business, but there's input and insight that goes back and forth. We need to understand the sales cycle so we can predict cash flow. We need to understand the margins of how they're selling so we can understand where profitability actually comes in, how we're actually pricing, who are we actually going after for these customers? Are we going after the right customers or should we be focusing on something entirely different? It's not like we're deciding their sales strategy, but we need to understand their sales strategy as to how it's actually impacting everything else in the organization. From the operations side, very often CFO, people look to CFOs as, oh, we're the ones who are going to come in and cut costs. And we look at it as, yes, costs definitely need to be managed, but you can't cut your way to growth. So while you definitely need to make sure your costs are correctly managed, you're not overspending on things that you can or should be getting for different price points or cost structures. It is about where are we investing? What are the resources that are needed to really deliver everything we want to make sure we're growing and achieving this? And it's really fascinating. It comes up most obviously this time of year as we're wrapping up this year, as we're heading into, as we've gone through annual planning and budgeting and forecasting and all the fun stuff like that. What's really interesting is that we talk about this with our clients very often. It's like we need to understand their planning and their goals before we can do their budgets. And they're like, well, why? I'm like, well, what are we budgeting for? Do you want us to just take last year's numbers and add on a percentage for where you're hoping the company will grow next year? Or do you want us to actually figure out what is it we're trying to do? And therefore, where do we need to be investing in resource allocation that's required within the company that's actually going to help you do that? Those are two different conversations. And so budgeting really becomes a key focus of that actual annual planning. It's a result of the planning. This is what we're trying to do, not just next year, but over the next 3 to 5 years. So when we go through that planning session with many of our clients, we're shifting the conversation to not just the next year conversation. We almost like to work backwards from a 5-3-1 perspective. We find very often business owners, if you're doing it as 1-3-5, like, okay, we do next year, then 3 years, then 5 years, very often we end up with step-up goals, right? Next year is, well, this year plus a certain percentage. 3 years must be then, okay, what's next year plus whatever is on top of that. And 5 years just becomes that on top of that. Whereas if you think about it, the other way around, 5 years is, okay, what do we really want from 5 years? And then it becomes a little bit more of that, okay, now we can take that down to 3 years. Okay, so next year, what is it we're actually going to be doing that's going to help us move this forward? It doesn't mean that you have to have a 5-year projection mapped out and saying, well, this is exactly every single step along the way. But you want the goals for 5 years set so that 1-year goals are actually helping you move you closer towards achieving those bigger goals longer term.
This is reminding me of a conversation we've shared previously on a well-known methodology that's grounded in a decades-old strategic planning tradition.
I think it's coming up on over close to a century old. If you actually look back to some of the sources over there, I mean, there are a lot of different ways of putting the structure and clarity in place. We're big fans of whatever methodology helps put structure and clarity in place. We're very big fans of. None of the concepts are brand new, but it is about how we implement them within the companies that really helps them achieve these goals.
Brings us back to that familiar word of adaptability. There's common sense is very scalable. The individual methodologies, a pure implementation of a methodology from a book, whatever the packaging is very rare, if ever. found in reality. Even a methodology as great as EOS.
No, it's very, very true. I mean, so we're talking about EOS. I've seen it really save companies and turn them around. I've seen it almost destroy companies. Very often the success or failure of it is, to your point, how it is implemented. Is it the right company that's ready to tackle that? Do they have the right things in place that actually will help them actually do this? Because just to say, great, this is how you're going to run your company moving forward, doesn't really always work when the rubber meets the road. There's a lot of power in the tools that they bring and how they've made some of these tools simple and easy to understand. It doesn't always make it every single piece of it. Well, this is exactly how you must do this, and this is how it will actually work for companies. And so to your point, it's that, okay, what is needed in this company that's going to help put the structure and clarity in place around this? We work with many companies running on EOS, and I think it is a very powerful tool for many of them. I've also seen business owners hide within it to avoid or to not take responsibility for some pieces. They'll hide behind the structure of it, which is usually to the detriment of the business. So we've definitely seen it, not work out as well, but it's nothing against the actual system or structure as a whole. Very often it is how it gets implemented and what is actually going on with the company for the pieces they can or should be using that's really going to drive their growth.
Reminding me of the just-in-time manufacturing method, just-in-time and just enough methodology.
No, I mean, it's fascinating, watching what goes on in businesses. I mean, we all know, a founder or business owner, when they launch their company, they have their dreams and visions of what it will actually be. Very few, most of them, first of all, are not serial entrepreneurs, and most of them, by and large, are first entrepreneurs. And it is just fascinating to watch, when reality sets in of what it actually takes to build and run a business. And, okay, now we actually, yes, that's all the things that you dreamed of what your business would be. But day to day, you're dealing with all of this kind of stuff, and it's just fascinating to watch that actually come out. And once you get to a certain size, I remember watching an interview recently from Elon Musk, where he's like, once you build everything else that runs as the CEO, usually you're only dealing with problems then. And if you're not on board to be the one, because everything else the rest of your team is handling, they come to you when there's a problem they can't handle or they need your input on. And if you're not on board with that's what it actually takes to be there, then, is that really the role that you want to have within your company?
Problem solver, chief problem solver.
Chief problem solver. Yeah, no, it definitely comes into play at various points in time. And very often it's not the right fit for them. So they can bring in the rest of the team around them that take on some of those roles.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it is their business, obviously. But what we very often find, sometimes just a mindset shift of ownership does not always mean leadership within companies. Just simply because you founded and own the company doesn't mean you're the best person to continue to be the leader of actually making sure certain pieces of it actually happen. Ultimately, it's always your responsibility as it is your company, but that's where bringing in the right team at this level really comes into play.
When you look to the future of even the next half decade, year, even with the rate of change we're seeing in technology, it's staggering, the growth of new tools and nodding towards generative AI. And how do you see that directly impacting your space and the clients, businesses that you're interacting with? What trends are you sensing in the environment and in the industry?
So I'm always fascinated at how quickly, not just change is happening, but to your point, how quickly the rate of change is increasing. I'm always fascinated in watching all of that happen. I think generative AI opens up a whole new set of tools in how companies can do business, but it does remain a tool. And that's the part that I think companies struggle with. AI became the buzzword, everything AI related. Yes, we want. Yes, but what does it actually do for your company? We're not sure yet, but we want. And it's like, okay, so, let's figure out what that actually does for your company. What I've also found fascinating is a lot of things get thrown into the, under the AI, whether it's actually AI or not. There's a lot that gets thrown into automation as referred to as AI, which those two are not always the same things. In fact, very rarely are the same things, as well, at least to some pieces. But what I have seen really interestingly is open more business owners' minds to some degree of automation and investing in automation, even if that's not actually AI. was speaking to a business owner recently where it was a conversation around AI that had her begin to put, almost like it's more on the RPA automation side of things in place within her company because it wasn't something that she had come across or thought of before. But once AI became the buzzword of the day and she started looking into it, then it's like she did this and this investment replaced the work of like 5 or 6 people. Now, was it actually AI? No. Was it a degree of investment in automation that this entire concentration on what has changed within businesses, that brought it to mind that she should look into and invest in? Absolutely. So I do find, even whether it's technically AI or not, there's a lot more investment going into improving companies internally. Within our space, AI in theory can handle a lot of data. And that's where the difference between that CFO versus other functions within the department come into play. Because the CFO is not about actually, doing day-to-day, journal entries and bookkeeping kind of stuff. It is more about the insight. And so while AI can compile some of these pieces, how the insight gets applied or what it should be in line with over there, that's really where the actual magic happens. And that's really where we see us continuing to add value. So AI tools, we're seeing some begin to enter into, more of the day-to-day, handling some of more of the day-to-day kind of things within our space on not within the CFO space, but on the accounting side, we're definitely seeing more come into play. And I think that will continue on how some of that begins to play, continues to play out. Where companies invest in it and what we're seeing companies do with it, it remains fascinating. We keep coming across new cases where companies are figuring out ways to do more things, from marketing to content creation to idea generation, even just coming up with, okay, this is the problem we have, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, throw out 15, 20 ideas that way that can do something like this. Even just, starting some of those kind of things to throw against the wall for problem solving, we've seen some companies use creatively. Not that that's the actual solution they pick, but just the process of going through the ideas. And for anyone who's been in those kind of planning sessions or problem solving sessions, it is about just going through a bunch of different ideas so you can come to the right solution. So I've seen some companies, pretty sizable companies, use that as an addition to the regular planning and problem solving they were focusing on. So I continue to watch the space and remain fascinated by the space and what it gets looked at. I still go back to recognizing that it is just a tool in and of itself. And you have to know, how to use the tool and what the result of what you actually want to do this. It is not an all-encompassing tool. It reminds me of that phrase, right? To a man with a hammer, every problem's a nail. So you got to be careful in this, running around with AI. That's not always the answer to every single problem we're all facing. That doesn't mean the hammer isn't, that hammer is a very useful tool. Knowing how to use it is obviously becomes really important. So AI is incredibly powerful and it will continue to get more powerful, I believe, and its applications will continue to evolve. It's recognizing what it can do for your organization, and therefore what is the best way to bring it in, how to use it to make sure you get what you want from the process.
Thank you for sharing. You've shared a few points of wisdom that I really appreciate and I think deserve acknowledgement. A man with a hammer, all he sees is nails being one of them. You can't cut your way to growth being another. And I don't want to mischaracterize the first one I heard you share, but the high tide hides rocks. Did I get that right? And when that tide goes out, it reveals some things that were there that you didn't think were there, and probably the opposite. So I greatly respect the experience and the expertise, the wisdom that you bring to the conversation. And I suppose one of my last questions for you, Nelson, is what haven't we discussed that you feel like we should?
Well, I remain it's just more in general for the business landscape moving forward. We always hear about, are we in the recession? What are rates going to be? We get asked a lot of those kind of questions. So it really becomes about the outlook for the future, who's probably not something we've gotten to yet. And it's not that I have a crystal ball in any way, shape, or form. It's just a common question we very often get. I've always remained cautiously optimistic on the business world in general. Entrepreneurs by default, are problem solvers. They're the ones who have the dreams, and every organization, every culture, every economy needs those dreamers to come up with new solutions for problems that we see or may not see yet.
Mm.
So I'm always encouraged by the level of entrepreneurship, which seems to keep increasing. As more people try and do more with creating new businesses for new problems, for new solutions. Occasionally, we've come across the ones who have a solution that now becomes looking for a problem, which is always something we try to avoid doing when we support, work with companies. You usually need to understand what is the problem you're solving and who actually has that problem becomes really key. But the economy overall, I mean, there are some aspects that have been slowing for some time. There are some aspects that are turning around. So we remain cautiously optimistic on the future in general. Now the Fed seems to have paused its rate cuts and its rate hikes and is now beginning to consider rate cuts. That certainly makes certain things easier as the cost of capital has gone up for many businesses over the past year and a half or so as they've raised rates. So that is encouraging as well. But there's a lot out there. There's a lot to be, like I said, there's cautious optimism. There's a lot of cautious optimism out there in the space.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. That is encouraging. I think maintaining cautious optimism is the right approach. There's a book by John Lewis Gaddis. He's a professor at Yale where he's taught a course called On Grand Strategy for many years. He wrote a book to the same name. And in that book, he talks about strategy being the balance between the aspirations and capabilities. And he points out a number of historical anecdotes of leaders and strategists historically who have fallen victim in one camp or the other. The Persian king Xerxes as an example of all aspirations.
Yeah.
And how that led to ruin, and others who fall far onto the other side of being so stuck in the details and the considerations of what could happen, failed to actually do anything. And what he talks about is the hallmark of a great mind is one that can effectively balance two opposing sides while maintaining function. And I think cautious optimism is a good mantra for that. It's saying there is an aspiration for the future. There is growth. Things are trending at a macro level in the right direction. We're seeing more entrepreneurship. We're seeing problem solving on things we see and we don't see.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's the stuff that's required to move society forward, to move cities forward and businesses forward, et cetera. While the caution part of the cautious optimism denotes the orientation on capabilities. It's not just being a pie in the sky dreamer with your head in the clouds. It's having your feet firmly rooted in reality and having a pragmatic lens on things. And I would finish by saying that lends itself very well to being adaptable, like we've connected on earlier. Because if your feet are on the ground, but you're not stuck, with your head in the sand, you're looking up, you're aware of opportunities, as you shared at the beginning, always being considerate of how the second and third order effects of a decision, of a big move, can affect your options, that you can maintain that nimble adaptability as you move forward, whether it be at an individual level or more at an organizational level.
Thank you. No, it's very, very true. And thank you for referencing that book. I have to see if it's one I've read already. If not, I'm going to have to go get that one. Because I do like the framework on that you've shared. It sounded familiar, but I will have to see if it's on my reading list already or not.
You got it. On Grand Strategy by John Lewis Gaddis is a good one. Well, I know there's probably a number of things we could unpack, but I think we're at a place that seems right to plant the flag for the tee us up for a follow-on discussion at some point in the future, perhaps.
Sounds great.
Nelson, it was a pleasure connecting with you today. Thanks again for coming on the line and sharing your time and insights.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise.